Hey, what's up? This video is going to show you how to beef up the snare sound in your mix by using a sample to blend in and augment with the real drum kit. And I do have a free snare sample that I'm going to let you download with this video. It's really been like a secret weapon that I've used in my mixes for many years now. So I'll let you have that and you can use it in your own mixes today. So let me give you an example of what it sounds like and then show you really just the workflow of how pros use drum samples and can pick the right ones quickly and not have it really just be a drag on their mixes trying to debate which drum sound to go for. So here's a drum mix with just the live snare drum, and as you can hear, it already sounds pretty good. So pretty good live snare sound, right? But we could probably get it a little bit more crack, a little bit more intensity out of the snare. So let's load up a snare trigger track here. I'm using the Slate Trigger plugin. And let's load in the snare sample that I'm going to let you download here. It's called my U-Drum Brass Single Shot. Now let's hit play here. Oh, it's actually a phase reversal required, so let's try that again. There we go. So let's A-B, we'll go without it, and then I'll bring it in again. So I love what that does already. And the thing I love most about it is that it doesn't make it sound like we're completely replacing the snare sound that we had in this drum kit. It just sounds like it's punchier, it's got more crack, it's got more impact, but it still maintains the character of the snare that was actually recorded. So let's hear what this sample sounds like just on its own. And you can see it's called Single Shot. Well, that's because it literally is just one sample. It's just one hit. We just managed to get this magical crack of the snare the way the drummer hit it when we were recording these samples. And really the rest of them, they didn't sound like this, but this one sounded great. And because it's a single shot, that means it's going to add a lot of consistency. So every hit is just going to be the same underneath your live snare. So you might not want to use a single shot sample as your main snare sound and the only snare track, although you could, and I have, but this is much better suited to augmenting a live snare that's already there. And I also use it to blend in with other samples. Sometimes I'll have maybe 2 or 3 different snare samples, and I'm almost always in the past, almost 10 years now, almost always using this single shot sample alongside a live snare and maybe some other samples too, to just increase that crack and intensity of the snare. I just love what this sample does. Like I said, it's been my secret weapon. And for me, when I'm using samples to blend with a live drum sound and augment it, I'm looking for that sweet spot where if you mute the live snare, the snare sample alone doesn't sound quite good enough, but if you mute the sample, the live snare doesn't sound quite good enough. So they both need to be there. For example, even though the sample sounds great, if we mute the snare top and bottom, I mean, it still sounds cool, really aggressive, maybe missing some body and character. But on the other hand, if we just go with the live snare, it's got a lot of body, but it doesn't have that same like aggressive cut through the mix. But then we have them both together. Voila, sounds great. So I want you to download this single shot brass snare sample. You can use it in your mix. I'll give you the WAV file download and the trigger format, so you can just literally just drag and drop into whatever you're using. And despite all the amazing drum sample libraries that are out there, so many of them sound so great, but I've kept my drum sample library really small for many years. And I remember hearing interviews with Chris Lord-Alge and other famous mix engineers who say that they purposely only have, 3, 4, or 5 snare samples or kick samples that they have in their library. And every single mix they do, they're just choosing out of that small group of, let's say, 5 different samples. And that's a workflow that I've really adapted over the past 10 years. And on pretty much any mix I've done over that period of time, there's really just a small pool of maybe, again, 4, 5, maybe 6 different snare samples that I'm auditioning at the beginning of every mix. And like you just saw, I'm just looking for the one that blends with the live sound and augments it and that they both sound great together. And then I just print it and move on. I print it down to an audio track and I move on with the mix. That way you can stay creative and not always be second guessing and saying, even though you're moved on and you're almost finished mixing the vocals, you go back and say, maybe I should add another snare sample or switch out the snare sample. It's going to throw everything off. You got to be able to just make decisions quickly choose the drum sounds, commit to the drum sounds you want, and then move on with the rest of your mix. And honestly, if you're spending any more than, let's say, 5 or maybe max 10 minutes auditioning kick and snare samples and committing to the samples for your mix, then it's just taking you too long. And you probably have too many options, too many different samples that you're auditioning and trying out and using in combination. You've got to narrow your library down to just a handful of go-to samples that you know are going to work in any scenario. And that's going to help you mix a lot faster and gain momentum and bring simplicity to your workflow. And by the way, with this free sample I'm giving you and any others, don't be afraid to process them just like you would real drums. So even though in this mix, I blended that single shot with one of my other snare samples as well, I printed it down and I still ended up doing a little bit of EQ, dipping out some ringing frequencies that were building up, adding some top end, adding some bottom end, some saturation, and here's what we ended up with. So there you go. Doesn't have to be complicated. Have a few go-to samples and you can beef up your snare sound, your kick sound in your mixes. Do it quickly, efficiently, stay in the creative flow. So you can click on the link in the description for this video to download this sample, absolutely free. Normally, I've kind of reserved this sample for the members of my premium mixing and tracking courses, but I'm gonna let you guys have it and add this into your arsenal because I think it's gonna add a lot of smack, attack, punch, and really help your snare cut through any mix. That's the great thing about this single shot sample, is that it's going to cut through and be heard in any mix, no matter how thick, dense, and fat it is. So check it out, enjoy it, use it to your advantage, and all I ask in return is, well, really nothing. Just maybe give me a thumbs up on this video, drop a comment, and make sure you're subscribed. All right, talk to you guys later.